Afternoon, everyone. My name is Pierre Somal. I'm professor in Louvain School of Management, and besides my regular teaching, I do take care of the MBA we organize in Louvain. We organize this together with BMI, and it's in this context that we organize this meeting. So if later you have questions related to the MBA, my email is in the chat or will be in the chat, so don't hesitate to come to me. This fall, we organized two events, two major learning events. One is related to hybrid way of working. This will be organized with Cercle du Lac. You know, home working, how do we organize this? It looks easy today, but every company does struggle in finding the right tempo between home working, between employee satisfaction, company satisfaction. So it's not easy. We have a set of workshops there that will be organized at Cercle du Lac. The information will also be in the chat, so don't hesitate to have a look there. The second initiative, diversity and inclusion, is the one for which you are here today, and more than 130 people enrolled, but I see that there are about 50 people already there. So 50 participants, thanks for coming. And by the way, I want also to thank all the people who helped us in the communication of this event, because it's important. The network connects NERA, also the alumni of Louvain, several association of alumni in Louvain. So thank to you for your help. Why is learning a module on diversity and inclusion? Well, for two reasons. The first reason is that we, Louvain and BMI, we believe it's important today. If you look at the world around us, diversity and inclusion have our values we have to promote and push, but also in a pragmatic way. I mean, the business companies who have really organized their organization on this diversity and inclusion, they really show very good performance. And Claire will explain this. It's really an asset for companies. So it's both for the wealth of the world, for the good of the world, but also for companies. So really believe in this. And to explain this, I want to introduce Claire. I have the pleasure to introduce her. Claire works at Febelfin. She's a specialist on diversity and inclusion, but it's not only gender, it's also culture, it's also age. I'm thinking, we in Louvain and BMI, we work old and young people together. It's also a kind of diversity that is key. Claire works for Febelfin, but she's also the co-chair of Women in Finance, a group of companies or financial institutions that want to improve gender balance overall. She's also the chair of the Belgian Association of Diversity Managers. So you can join this association because they have a charter there. You can sign, and it's really, really something we would like to push. Claire, this was my pleasure to introduce you. I give you the floor. Just for maybe before Claire starts, for questions, I think put the questions in the chat. We'll take them afterwards. And in the meantime, switch off, mute yourself so that we can all quietly listen to Claire. Sorry, I stop now. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, Pierre, for your nice introduction. I'm really excited to have these 45 minutes together with you. We'll go through several issues and topics, and the purpose today is definitely not to give you a full overview on a very complex topic. It is more about sharing a few thoughts which could initiate a kind of journey for some of you. There's also more, as you will see or learn at the end of the workshop, because following this workshop, we also have a series of breakfast meetings which are planned to go much more in depth in a few different teams. And well, looking forward also to have these opportunities with you. So if everything goes well, I'll just share my screen so I can indeed, yes, go through the presentation. Okay, so obviously what I would like to do today is, first of all, connect words like diversity, equity, and inclusion together with strategy. That is certainly an important part, which is, in fact, thinking about the reasons why we should not remain homogeneous among us, the risks if we do not act, what we should at least do before starting, how does an action plan look, and a few pitfalls. And well, with that, I guess we can start. As I just mentioned, it's just trying to go to a few bullet points. We can, of course, there's a lot that you can do by reading. So I will also have a few useful links at the end. First of all, what are we talking about today when we discuss about diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging? Each time I will mention diversity, it's in the broadest sense of meaning the mix of all of us, whatever ages, origins, genders, sexual orientation, health, parental situation, but also all the cognitive aspects. Indeed, we hear more and more people addressing cognitive diversity. That is about having people with different ways of thinking, different ways of connecting with other people as well. When we talk about equity, that's the E, which is rather new. Before you had people saying, we work on diversity. That was like 10 years ago. Then people started to say, we are working on diversity and inclusion. And diversity was about the mix, and inclusion about working on the culture. And more people mention diversity, equity, and inclusion. And equity is really what we can translate as the fairness frame for the mix. Because if you treat everyone strictly the same, in fact, you are not equitable, because not everyone has the same needs. And the easiest example, if that would be a bit unclear for you, is, for instance, yes, colleagues with disability have also what is often called special needs. That is, if you adjust to special needs of your colleagues, you create again a situation of equity. Inclusion is about welcoming the mix and making it work. You will probably all have heard about this very famous saying, which is diversity is inviting everyone to the party, and inclusion is when everyone starts to dance. Now, with a bit of an experience, when we look at that, we would also say, in fact, inclusion is certainly also when we discuss together about the date and the kind of music we want. And then people start also to discuss about the importance of belonging, and belonging is when people feel valued as part of the mix. So that was just about a few definitions. Now to a very fundamental thing, and you will see just in a minute, I'm also sharing that in the things you need to have before starting acting, it's really having identified why your company, your institution, your association should act on this. And as long as that has not been done, any work you would like to do might not be efficient enough. So this is really important. So of course, if we were in a room together, I would ask you, okay, what are the first ideas which spring to your mind? Why is it so important that we have teams as diverse as possible? And when I talk about teams, it also especially your management team. How diverse is your team? How diverse is your management team? And the first reason I nearly always get if I am in a room is, well, if there is a mix outside, we also need a mix inside. So that's about clients' diversity, obviously. But then, and I will come back to this in a moment, if you want to maximize the collective intelligence of your team, you need your team to be as diverse as possible. I'll come back to this immediately. It's also a boost in terms of innovation. It's part of your societal responsibility, obviously. And last but not least, it's a way of attracting and retaining the best talents. Let me go a little bit further in these different objectives. So indeed, there has been research after research after research showing a correlation between companies which perform better and a more diverse company. We see it in terms of growth and profitability. We see it, you know, the first argument we had on the former slide, the importance of reflecting the diversity of your clients. The faster time to market is a reality as well. If you imagine for a moment how diverse engineers teams in the automotive sector are, while as a matter of fact, they are building cars for 48% of their clients are women. So how diverse are engineer teams building cars? There has been some improvement lately, but it's still a very important attention point. It's especially fundamental for all the teams who work with artificial intelligence, like homogeneous white teams who are building, nourishing artificial intelligence with consequences that at some point the intelligence doesn't even know. There are some people with dark skin, with all the consequence then on products. So you see here several studies, not only these, we see also that it's consistent in time. So McKinsey has 3 times in a row in 2014, 2017, 2019, they reviewed the link between profitability and gender diversity and between profitability and ethnic diversity. And you see that over and over, the results got in line. So the message you may sometimes hear that, well, it has maybe not been proven that diversity really impacts the business. Well, you can definitely be sure this has been totally proven. When I mentioned a few minutes ago the importance of collective intelligence, I was referring to this very interesting study of Eric Larson published in Forbes in 2017, which shows you that a homogeneous team takes the best decision for the company in only 58% of the cases. While by having gender diversity, and by that we do not mean adding 1 woman to a team of 10 men, but by having like at least 30% of both genders, then you move from 58 to 73% of best decisions. It still improves to 80 if you have enough age diversity, which is also fundamental. And certainly today, more than ever, with challenges like global warming, having different generations also who will be differently impacted around the table is something fundamental. And finally, when you combine age, gender, and multicultural diversity, then you reach quite a high level of good decisions. Of course, at the same time, the time that the decision takes will be longer. The risk of meeting some conflicts is higher, but that is all part of the decision process. So I just wanted to spend a little bit of time on this. As myself, I didn't give a lot of details on what I'm doing, but as I'm mainly in charge of encouraging more diversity and inclusion in the financial sector, this notion of impacting the quality of our decisions has really been selected as the primary one to invest more in diversity and inclusion in the financial sector. So I just give also 2 examples of studies, but if you are tracking, through LinkedIn, For instance, you can follow on Harvard Business Review, or you can check what Catalyst or Korn Ferry, for instance, are publishing on the matter. These two studies were really interesting. The first one about how adding women to the C-suite really changes how companies think by making them much more open to change and much more adverse to risk. And quite similarly, we also see a link with ethic. There is more chance for a higher ethic in a mixed environment than in a homogeneous one. And we will see one of the reasons in a moment. We also mentioned, of course, social responsibility. And indeed, if you go back to the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN, well, SDG 5 about gender equality, SDG 8 on good jobs and economic growth, and SDG 10 mainly in terms of reducing inequalities are really clearly part of any action plan. Now, I just want to reflect a little bit with you on the risks if you do not act, while in fact several other companies are acting. Well, you might not understand some changing client needs. That's of course a very big one. Second, you may keep losing talents as you do not address culture. And especially we see that among millennials, having an inclusive culture is rated as essential to choose an employer. You may have difficulty to recruit new talents and also to retain them, obviously. You may underestimate the new challenges that your company is facing, but especially your decision process may become affected by groupthink. And that is a real danger for a company. As most of you will know, groupthink is when, in place of really each member of a team using their own thinking and sharing their thoughts, they all align to the thoughts of one very strong leader. And this risk happens more easily and faster in homogeneous groups. So obviously, we do not want at any point to have a team like this one having to face future challenges. So a few essentials before starting an action plan. As I mentioned, the first one, in my view, is having a real understanding of why this is part of a company's strategy. And to give you an illustration, that is exactly what we did for the financial sector as a whole. So we have asked to the CEOs of main banks in Belgium what they consider top of mind in terms of priorities for the sector. And then we saw how addressing diversity and inclusion could really help to these strategic priorities. And one of the priorities, for instance, is managing risks. And it is, again, proven that the more we are attentive to a good mix, gender mix, cultural mix, profile mix in different teams, the better we will be able to identify possible risks. Having a full commitment of the CEO and of the head of HR is really a must. Of course, you can also have like a medium-sized solution, having a CEO which is okay for it, or having a head of HR who is a bit tepid, so who is not against it, but who is not strongly supporting. It will have a huge impact, obviously. It makes a difference. Why? Research shows that the hardest group to impact, especially in large companies, is what we call middle management. But middle management listens to the CEO a lot. So if a CEO is not fully convinced and does not himself or herself give a very strong message, you will have more resistance from that middle management group. So that's really an attention point. Then, of course, before you start, you need to make what we call a zero meeting, zero measurement. So you need to measure the current levels of your talent mix inside the company. It's about measuring gender. It seems rather obvious, but it is also moving as a question, because today you will have columns and you will have male or female. We see that among millennials, the proportion of young people who do not want to identify as male or female, that is something evolving on a quite fast way. It's quite impressive. So it's just good to know that this is also a moving topic. What we say today may be already different in a relatively short time span. So measuring gender, obviously, measuring ages. For companies who are based in Brussels, certainly measuring language. Why? Because we see in lots of companies that just like for age, if you have in a company based in Brussels, for instance, two big leaders in two departments, and one is Flemish speaking and the other one is French speaking, and of course they are both bilingual or trilingual, that's not what we mean, but you will see nearly automatically that Flemish talents will tend to go to work in the team of the Flemish leaders, and French-speaking talents will nearly automatically go to the other side, to the French-speaking leader. And also, I mean, language diverse teams will also be more intelligent, especially to take decisions which will impact population in Belgium. So we should never forget also this specific cultural dimension in Belgium when applicable, of course. If you are working only in Flanders or in Wallonia, you may consider this is not applying to you. And then you hear also lots of questions, especially nowadays. How can we measure culture? How can we measure multicultural level of our company? So some companies will just measure nationalities. It's an easy one. But frankly, between you and me, it doesn't mean a lot of things. Why? As soon as you are a company with more than 1,000 employees, for instance, you will nearly always have at least 30 different nationalities. And you may think, oh, wow, so we are extremely diverse. But this doesn't say anything about how inclusive you are of people, whatever their accent, their skin color, their religion. So if you want to really understand that part of the mix, you will need to do something different. And there we have two options. You can either ask the help of the Banque Carrefour de la Sécurité Sociale, so Social Security Service in Belgium has the capacity to analyze on a totally anonymous way the cultural mix of your employees to give you an indication of the percentage of people who are from first or second generations of migrations. That's a possibility. And a very different possibility you have is to ask to the people themselves. What do I mean? By having, and again, that's probably more for larger companies, you organize a fully anonymous survey, and one of the questions of the survey can be, do you want to auto-identify on your origin, where you can have really a drop-down box, very large, where you also include, of course, I prefer not to answer. That's also totally okay. Next to that, you also need to make a kind of zero measurement of your culture. How inclusive is the culture in the company? And to do that, it's also very practical to use a survey, an anonymous survey, where you can ask two types of questions. So ideally, in such a survey, you will also have the possibility to see how the group of men answered versus the group of women, or how these different age groups answered, or I mean, you can really analyze in different angles, or how this department answered versus this other department. And you have questions like, I feel respected and valued. That's a very simple question, but if it's interesting to see if, for instance, there is or not a difference between what men and women say, or people who have auto-identified as from a different origin, and so on. And you can also ask explicit questions about inclusion, like, and there I would recommend to have different questions aspect by aspect. For instance, I believe that in our company, people have the same development opportunities, whatever their gender. I believe that in our company, people have the same possibilities, whatever their origin, and so on, aspect by aspect. That is really an advice. And you can combine work assessing the culture through a survey and through what we call focus groups. Focus groups are small work groups where you invite a group of participants where they need to feel totally safe, where they are totally allowed to tell their own mind. And in such a group, if you want this to be really safe, it's better to not make these groups mixed. I mean, I can give you an example of a focus group I made some time ago, where I had essentially, I wanted to address the situation of sexism, which was potentially existing in an IT department. And so I invited a group of women being in leadership positions. And together with them, in a closed environment, I started asking how things were going. And even in such a protected group, a homogeneous group, where they were all in the same kinds of jobs, it took some time before people started to admit, well, it doesn't go so well, as a matter of fact. We do have issues. And once one opened up about an issue, they all opened up. It's the same if you want to understand the reality of parentality, for instance, in your company. You should ideally not just mix young fathers and young mothers, but check a little bit what young fathers say apart and check what young mothers say. You might be surprised and have very different feedbacks. So that's really interesting. And then, of course, you will need to have one person in that role. And of course, depending on the size of the company, we know that it's not always possible, obviously, to have one person doing this full-time. It makes a lot of a difference when the person can do it full-time, but at least having it among clear responsibilities is something nice. And it's really important that the person has access to HR data. We will see that immediately. So that's why reporting to head of HR is something useful. Of course, if you report directly to the CEO, you should also have access to HR data, I guess. So these, I would say, are really essentials before you really start your plan. And I just want to show a few examples of what you can measure and how. So this is an example of how we have made visible and measured glass ceilings inside financial institutions. So what we do is really measure level by level and sub-level by sub-level the levels of women. And as soon as we see a brutal reduction, we consider that this is a specific level of glass ceiling. So in my example, the first glass ceiling is between the column 14 and 15. You see that all of a sudden we fall from 54% women to 44%. So it's interesting to start working on that first group to understand, well, what did happen, what kind of jobs are available at that higher level, and so on. So that's just an illustration on how measuring very well in a 0 time it's often a surprise for the management as well. Huh? So the fact that you make it visual is an eye-opener. Most companies think that they would have probably one glass ceiling, which would be when it's the difference between employees and middle management on one level and senior management on the other. And so that there would be a glass ceiling between these two groups. But the reality is that even in the group of middle management, we often have already a glass ceiling. So measuring, really important. And this is an example of how you measure a culture. You know, I just mentioned to you the importance of anonymous surveys as a sector, because in place of working for one company, I'm working for a full sector, which is financial sector. We have had in 2020 a huge survey on multicultural inclusion in our sector. So we have allowed to all the participants to the survey, and they were above 1,000, to auto-identify as it was totally anonymous by origin. And you see these different origins here under. And the question was, are you hearing sometimes, often or very often, racist microaggressions? So we were not saying, are you a victim? We were just saying, are you hearing them? And the result is quite striking. You see the interest of asking these kind of questions, because you see that people who auto-identified as originary from Western Europe or Belgium, there are only 1 on 5 to say, yes, I hear them sometimes or often, versus 2/3 of employees who auto-identified as Black or from North Africa. And when we ask them, what is the impact of these microaggressions on your self-confidence and on your career, you see that half of them at least say, yes, it has definitely an impact on my self-confidence and on my career. So this is, of course, an obvious reason to want to invest in a concrete action plan. So now we can a little bit review the different parts of the action plan itself. So it is indeed a plan which will be based on the measures that you just have done. So you have measured diversity in your company and you have measured the level of inclusion. So based on that, you know what should be your priorities. If you come with examples, as I just show you, you know you will have to address unacceptable behavior, humor at work, microaggressions, because if you do not, it's like the elephant is in the room, but you are not addressing it. You will have to define objectives, like objectives in recruitment and promotion. You will have to review the HR processes. And when I talk about objectives, I'm sure some of you would like to ask in the chat, what about quotas? So let me anticipate this and come with an answer on this question. I do believe that smart quotas are a very effective tool to improve the mix. Now that you have understood that this mix will help you to take better decisions, can you just say, well, it will still evolve, and if equality comes in 10 years, it's good? And can you afford to keep taking decisions which could have been better with a more mixed group? Of course you cannot. And that is where smart quotas can help. I'll give an example. Deciding of a quota, for instance, on not on the result, like we define a quota of 50-50 women, men, and that means that in 2024 we need to have equality everywhere. Well, if you are relatively close to these figures, it can be a perfect goal, of course. But in some cases, it's totally unrealistic. So I had an example in the past which was really helpful, where in a large bank, we had the function of branch manager is the very obvious leadership function. And we only had 24% women in that job, while in fact, in the talent pool of deputy branch managers, we had 50-50 actually. So that was a pretty interesting case, because as we had 50-50 in the talents which were possible candidates, the decision we took was to say, from now on, every year, half the new branch managers appointed need to be women. Because, I mean, we knew that the talent were there. And so change came pretty fast. And what is even more interesting is that because change came pretty fast due to the very strong top-down message from the management and to several actions which were more bottom-up, connecting, for instance, women who were possible candidates with women who were already branch managers in order to search, is it feasible for me? Do you think I could do this? Is it a job that you could do 80% if you want? And so on and so forth. What happened was, the first year, we did achieve 50% of the new nomination. And so we had several visible role models doing the job. The second year as well. And in fact, the third year, we even didn't need to mention it, because in the biases that we all have unconsciously, as soon as HR was thinking, okay, Peter is going to retreat, who could become the new branch manager, in place of unconsciously thinking who looks like Peter, it was more, oh, we had several great new branch managers, among which several women. Who looks like these? So it already enlarges, of course, the possible models in the unconscious. It's also, of course, making sure that we bring the notion of inclusive leadership in the way you select managers and the way you train them. Inclusive leadership is the leadership style which will encourage this notion of inclusion in the team. So which will give to the team members the feeling, okay, I can be my true self at work. My own personality is valued. My ideas are valued. So it's, of course, it creates a lot of belonging. But it's also fundamental, and very often that part of the action plan is forgotten, to address the situation about what goes wrong in the culture. So, for instance, this notion of addressing microaggressions, we see that contrary to what you could think, most employees have no ideas that, first of all, that the CEO or the top management is totally, firmly against any form of lack of respect between employees. So that's always good to remember, to remind them. But second, employees who are witnessing or who are victims of these microaggressions or serious aggressions have no idea who can help them. So having a yearly campaign about this is really something necessary, and certainly addressing this also as part of the plan is fundamental. And then, of course, developing a way to communicate more inclusively, which is also letting employees themselves share about their issues or their experience. So that is also, so you see that an action plan is much more than just, wanting to recruit more diverse people. And then I would just want to finish with 2 quick slides. One is the kind of most frequent excuses not to act that you might hear. They are very classical. We are not such a large company. This doesn't apply to us. Well, especially if you are a small company, you need to make sure that at least the group of people with whom you are challenging, sharing ideas is as diverse as possible to create more exposure and to help you think out of the box. Lots of people will say, we are just, only focusing on hiring the best. So we don't look. We would, of course, recruit the best if they are black or white, and often these people add or green. Well, definitely, when you say we want to hire the best, and we do not want to work on these other parameters like diversity and inclusion, it might be so that this notion of the best is already very much biased. So that's something to work on. We don't have a budget for a diversity plan. Good to know that, for instance, if you are in Brussels, you can not only have to spend, but you can even get some subsidies. For instance, if you build a diversity plan with the help of Actiris, the Brussels region, they even have a budget to help you. So, and there are lots of measures which do not have a cost, or which have a very low cost and which are quite effective. We don't have anyone available to work on this. Well, that's of course up to you, yeah, but it's really important to make time, of course. I don't have time as a leader to invest in this. Well, then you might even be taking sometimes decisions which could have been better with a more diverse group. And then last but not least, the pitfalls when implementing diversity and inclusion. Working on the figures only and not addressing the culture. That's very frequent. And a few years ago, when people were only mentioning diversity, they would frequently forget this second part. And so you do lots of effort, people are hired, people discover your culture, people leave, and people speak badly about your company. So really working on both is critical. Diversity in the box. That's typically a fact to say, well, here we have 4 chapters of diversity. This is what we do for gender. This is what we do for sexual orientation. This is what we do for multicultural, without any connections between these approaches. That is not very, it's not a good way to make sure that everyone feels on board. For instance, white hetero males around 45 years old may have the feeling, well, this is nothing for us. I mean, or they play a crucial role in the shift of culture. So that's really important. Sometimes, not often, but sometimes, some leaders who are truly open on the matter think that they should not communicate about it because it is so obvious and it will progress by itself. That, of course, does not work. We know it. And then an important one is about taboos. And you have different taboos in different organizations. I've met all kinds of taboos. Companies saying, well, we work on all topics, but not multicultural because you can't measure that. So we don't work on that one. Or, no, but in our company, we work on everything, but not age. Age is very complex, you know, and also, I mean, honestly, aged employees are very expensive. So, you know, I mean, somehow, if some leave and we get some more young people, it will also help, of course. Or we see that we should be working on linguistic inclusion and linguistic diversity, but that is also quite a taboo in Belgium sometimes. Or we prefer to pretend that we do not have any form of sexism or racism in this company, because who likes that? I mean, it's really hard. It hurts a leader to have to admit, well, our company is not perfect. It's made of people who outside have all kinds of attitudes, and obviously we may have to deal with sexism in this company. So the better we will address it clearly, and the more we have a chance to really reduce the fact that these situations happen. So that's an important one. And I just finished with this illustration of lumberjack syndrome. I found it was quite funny. So the lumberjack syndrome is, you have this guy who tries to cut this big tree, but his axe is not very cutting. So ideally, he should stop doing what he does and work on his tool to make his tool more sharp, right? But he's saying, I can't stop. I'm busy cutting this tree. And that's when we say, well, no, we just said we would do a diversity plan, so we need to do this diversity plan. And in fact, we have maybe a big issue to address before, but we just want to go on. So I think that I've used most of my time already. It went quite fast. And I would like to just give you an overview of how we will work during the 3 breakfast meetings we will have in the coming months. So there's one in October, one in November, and one in December. I think you will have in the chat a link if you want to register. And we wanted to really go much more concretely during these 3. So it will be very interactive, where people will have a possibility to present their own situation and ask for advice. We'll have discussions. So the first one is more about how to start building the plan, how to make the whole measurement thing. The second one is more making a zoom on everything to reduce discrimination risk and impact of unconscious bias. We didn't discuss that much today, but there were so many things to discuss about which KPIs to choose, because obviously what you don't measure doesn't get done, and about obstacles. And the third one will just make a zoom on everything regarding how to make a shift in the culture to make it more inclusive, how to implement inclusive leadership, and so on. So that was it. And then I'm also, of course, sharing with pleasure a few interesting links among different studies, and maybe with a special zoom on a toolbox that we have developed to help members of financial institutions. So that's the link inclusioninfinance.be, which is a toolbox with 25 tools to address issues like bias, microaggressions, how to develop a culture of more inclusive leadership, and how to just foster inclusion in the culture in all kinds of different ways. So basically, I think I'm round, and now is the time to listen to your questions. So here I am.
Thank you, Claire. 2 questions already in the chat. One is about GDPR. I mean, all these surveys, how do you manage to avoid issues there? Maybe quickly on this one first.
Sure. Well, in fact, GDPR, of course, it's always important to address GDPR while working on diversity and inclusion, because, for instance, you might want to encourage employees to develop like employee groups or networks. And if you do so, you may have, for instance, a LGBTQI and allies network. You might have a list of participants to that, and you do not want to end with having lists of employees in function of their sexual orientation, of their ethnicity, and so on. That's why if we go towards encouraging employees to make groups, it's always important to have open groups, because you have LGBTQI colleagues and allies. You have a multicultural group in which everyone is welcome. You have a gender mixed group where male allies are more than welcome. And then for everything regarding measurement, you are working strictly and only on anonymous basis, so anonymous surveys indeed.
This was great. Thank you, Claire. This was a question from Sonia. Thank you, Sonia. A question from Florestan. You insist on a lot on the top-down approach. You need to have the change being supported by the management. But Florestan is asking whether there is also the need to convince I have a bottom-up approach, if I understand the question of Florestan correctly.
I totally agree. I mean, you know, that's one of the pitfalls when you do a 45-minute talk. You rush through something and you may not convey some dimensions. But what I explained also regarding this example in quota was achieved because we had a full combination of top-down and bottom-up approach. Also, what we just mentioned about having employee groups, that's a very good way to give a voice to employees, because one of the key things to remember when we think about needs of a certain group is nobody is better placed than people of that group to say what their needs are. So for instance, if you want to address the needs of employees with a disability, do not just, think for them, ask them. The same, of course, if you want to, before we launched the multicultural survey for the financial sector, we made a very safe place meeting where we invited only employees with a visible different origin, which is a very awkward word probably, but a way to say that these employees were only the employees who could have faced some racist experience due to how they looked. And in that safe environment, we captured what they learned. And yes, I would systematically encourage companies to work on both levels, because also providing, out-of-the-box experiences to just everyone also, to not only groups, but just to everyone, opportunities to join Breakfast in the Dark, opportunities to join a theater play, which is really conveying strong messages. All this is, of course, very active.
Thanks. Another question, somebody says, what about criteria for hiring people? In order to increase, because you touched upon the question, but could you go a bit further on this question? How to define the criteria? How would you do? Or what are your suggestions for this?
Well, first of all, there is indeed a special way to make inclusive job ads. Job ads are sometimes very hard for people who think they do not belong. Mm-hmm. And for instance, there was a comment on the situation in IT departments. Typically, if you let the head of IT make the job ad for one of their colleagues, he or she might come with 10 to 12 bullet points about, well, they need to know that language and to have as many years experience and to know as many languages and so on and so forth. And some women, for instance, or some people with a different background looking at the description may think, oof, I have maybe 3 on the 4, but I do not fill all the criteria, so I will not apply. And that is not only true for women, but it's true for everyone who does not see enough role models to whom they can identify. And so it's much harder for them to say, okay, I will apply. So
you start at the recruitment and the way you add. I saw some of the comments, I just want to mention them. Somebody working for a company who is very diverse and telling that the company is great and that this environment is great. So it's a good example. And somebody from Tanzania, saying, well, we have to change things there. Thanks for the input. That's it. Are there other questions? I don't see, maybe somebody can take the word, simply the microphone, if you have a last question. Yeah, IT environment, how to make it gender equal in the IT environment. Isn't it discrimination towards men there? Because
the problem there again is about strategy and what we need to achieve. It's an enormous issue for an IT department to be homogeneous. We mentioned the problem with artificial intelligence, but also the whole IT methodologies such as Agile, they require permanent feedback. And we know also that the more homogeneous teams are, the hardest it is to give feedback. Plus, what we also see is very homogeneous male teams. Of course, the risk is that they will be also more hostile to the few women who will enter. So for these women, it's extremely important that they get, for instance, when they are starting, some mentor in the team who can check how things are going, but at the same time that there is really a work done on culture. I've just briefly mentioned the issue with humor, you know. Humor is extremely important in the culture. Everyone needs to laugh, and it's good for the stress, to let the stress a bit down. But it's really important to know that with humor, sometimes we exclude people, and some people feel even that they have to laugh together, even if it's not funny for them, even if they are hurt. So it's important to incorporate some new rules in the work environment. Like, for instance, when you talk about humor, it's always the receiver of the comment who defines if it is acceptable or not. So you can say, you know me, I'm not a racist, but this was so funny, I had to tell it. Well, I don't care. If I do not appreciate it, I have a possibility to ask you to stop this and not do it again. And the only way to react is to apologize and not do it again. Tina, question. Let's see that one.
I think
concerning
yes,
well, I see what you mean, Tina. So the question was, are the results of companies better because the teams are more diverse, or because they are more managing competencies in an inclusive way? Well, in fact, you really need both. So my answer is, imagine an instance that you have a very homogeneous company where there's a lot of inclusion, but still it's very homogeneous. How performing would that be? Personally, I don't think it would solve the problem. So we really need both components, because, I mean, at some point, for instance, the capacity to think out of the box will be so precious. And that comes because we all have a different journey, a different experience, and we are seen differently in society. So even if things are progressing, it's still a different experience on a daily basis to be born a woman, a man, to be in a homosexual or heterosexual relationship, to be transitioning, to have a darker skin, to have a headscarf. All these change the way society looks at you, and so obviously the way you are building yourself. So I think we really need both.
So you need the various inputs. So and you need a way to so that these inputs are contributing together. So you need both.
Exactly.
Okay. It's 5 o'clock. It's 5:02. I will propose to stop here, not because it's not interesting, but we cannot go on for long. You will receive the slides, and also you receive the link to the breakfast. They are free, and we hope to see you there, because we just want to grow the contents, and definitely your opinion are really welcome. I stop here, and I thank you, Claire, and I think all the participants. We were more than 70 participants at some time. Big success, Claire. Big thank you to you. You have in the chat the links. Have a nice day, everyone. See you somewhere, sometime. Being diverse. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.